Everybody, how are you? I hope this video message finds you doing well today. My name is Todd Beach, and this is AP European History.
So our discussions for today are going to cover a variety of things, and I know that you're very excited to hear. Before we cover any of the actual topics that you see up there, we are going to cover the rubric and format of the new test that is just coming for this one administration. We're going to cover Postwar Nationalism, Ethnic Conflict and Atrocities from Unit 9.5, a quick overview of contemporary Western democracies, and the fall of communism. And we'll get into most of the fall of communism up through 1989, and we'll hit the collapse of the Soviet Union on Monday.
And my name is Todd Beach. As I said before, I teach AP European History at Eastview High School in Apple Valley, Minnesota. And it's a suburb of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And happy Friday, everybody.
Yeah, I'm Katie Lancey. I teach at Coral Gables Senior High. It's a suburb of Miami, Florida. And I'm glad it's Friday too. And I hope that everyone, even though we're not going very many places, that everyone's going to have a relaxing weekend away from school, or maybe you're going to start preparing for this new format we're going to go over. So for this year only, just a couple of general things, and I know that information is already out there. Just for the 2020 exam, the format of the exam is going to change. Students are going to be taking an at-home 45-minute exam that will be free response only. For AP Euro, we're going to have a DBQ, and that DBQ can be typed or it can be submitted handwritten, and that goes for any exam this year. And so again, we're going to have a document-based question, and that document-based question is going to have 5 documents, and it's going to be scored using a modified rubric that's going to go from 0 to 10 points. So start going over that, Todd.
So the A point for the rubric for 2020 is the same as the A point in the original rubric, and that is for thesis or claim. So you have to respond to a prompt with a historically defensible thesis or claim that establishes a line of reasoning. The B point is contextualization, and that is to describe a broader historical context relevant to the prompt. So for 2020, there are no changes to the rubric for parts A and B. The DBQ will still require both a thesis and a claim that is historically defensible, has a line of reasoning, and contextualization that relates the topic of the prompt to relevant broader historical events.
All right, so here we do have some changes, and there are 5 possible points that can be earned for Part C this year for use of evidence, and that evidence comes from both the documents and outside information. 3 of the 5 points can be earned using documents. So the first point in this rubric for evidence can be earned by using the content of at least 2 documents to address the topic of the prompt. And this sort of mirrors the old rubric in the fact that there's a low bar point and there are higher expectations for points as well. So this is sort of like that first point for evidence in the old rubric for the DBQ. And moving forward, we're also looking for a second point that will be earned by supporting your argument in response to the prompt using at least 2 documents. So, and that is of course a higher bar. Supporting an argument is an explicit task where students are using the content of the document to further what their argument is in their essay. There's a third point now this year for using documents, and that can be that if a student uses 4 of the 5 documents that they're given to support an argument in response to the prompt. So 3 of these points come from the documents.
Okay, and then the other 2 points are evidence beyond the documents. And so what they've really done here in the C category is they've tried to create different ways or different avenues for students to earn points. Because the exam is 45 minutes, that is a tight time window. And so they are looking for constructing ways that you can earn points. So you've been before in the original rubric, you earned a point for using evidence beyond the document. And now they've expanded that to a point and a second point. So 1 point is earned by using at least 1 additional piece of specific historical evidence relevant to an argument about the prompt that is not from the documents. But you can also earn a second point if you use a second piece of specific historical evidence relevant to an argument beyond the prompt. And so we think about that in relation to sourcing and using the documents. This is really great that they have given you a chance to earn additional points in this manner.
And just a quick note that also, if you can, obviously the scoring guidelines for these are the same as the DBQ has been in the past. That information that you bring in as evidence beyond the documents must be separate from the contextualization, and it must be more than just a mere phrase or a reference.
Very good point, yes.
For part D, analysis and reasoning, there are 3 points that can be earned here. And for that first D point, which is something students have done, and I'm sure you've practiced, and Todd and I are going to have you practice this both in our lesson today and in our homework. There's a point for explaining how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience is relevant to an argument. And that is what, guys, we have been doing since last week when we've been bringing out that acronym HAPPY. And I know that your teachers use other acronyms like HIPPO or other possible acronyms, but this is what we call sourcing. It's really where we put our historian's cap on, so to speak, and think about the documents in a critical way. And you're expected to do that this year to get 1 point on one document, and a second point can be earned for doing the same task correctly on a second document. Again, thinking about the fact that time is going to go very quickly here. There's still quite a few things students are expected to do. So 2 possible points here for doing sourcing in the DBQ.
And then the final point on the rubric is the complexity point, and nothing on that part of the rubric has changed. So the last point on the rubric remains unchanged. Students can earn 1 point for demonstrating a complex understanding of the historical development that is the focus of the prompt, using evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument that addresses the question. And so in the coming days that we have in doing these video lessons, Katie and I are going to be super explicit about working in these skills into the lesson, into the review, and doing that as skill development. And like I said, just super explicit to help prepare you for your exam date.
Absolutely. And we will be providing homework that mimics using the documents, using the skills of contextualization and thesis. And I want to remind everybody that we will be starting a review next Thursday. And so all of the practice that we do starting next week will be on topics that we can see covered on this exam. That's going to be on May 13th. All right.
So I'm going to go into our lesson overview, and then Katie, I'm going to ask you to make sure that we are explicit about why we're still doing this before we get to review. So for our learning objective, explain the causes and effects of mass atrocities in the period following World War II to the present, explain state-based economic developments following World War II and the response to these developments, and explain the causes and effects of the end of the Cold War. The skills that we're working on today are skill 1, developments and processes, skill 2, sourcing and situation, skill 5, making connections, and our reasoning development, as really stated clearly in the objectives, will be causation today.
Great. And so Todd, thanks. I think that there's a lot of people that are saying, why are we continuing through the content of the course? We're almost finished. We're in Unit 9. We're towards the end. And it's just a reminder that given these really unprecedented circumstances, colleges and universities have agreed to be flexible. And they are accepting this modified version of the exam taken at home, only 45 minutes. I think this is a wonderful opportunity here for students to be able to exhibit all of the skills that they have learned all year and weave it in with sources and with content. But because of that, there definitely needs to be the clear message that the history of the course is important and the entirety of the scope of the course is important. So obviously now we're starting in period 4, which is World War I on, but there was definitely a push that we needed to cover this material for the sequencing of the course, be it a senior who might be going on to a higher course in college, or be it my own students, for example, who are going to move from this course to AP US history and need that background of the Cold War moving on to that class. So that's why we're almost done and we're close to starting review.
Super, thank you, Katie. Okay, so our warm-up, this is what we left you with as far as exam practice yesterday, and it's a short answer question. and it deals with skill 5, making connections. So task A is to describe one significant continuity in the role of organized religion in European life in the 20th century. Task B, describe one significant change in the role of organized religion in European life in the 20th century. And task C, explain how one political development affected the role of organized religion in European life in the 20th century. And so I selected 3 responses. Here's our response for task A. Again, we're looking for a significant continuity in the role of organized religion throughout the 20th century. This is from Anna at Central Bucks East High School in Pennsylvania. And Anna writes, one significant continuity in the role of organized religion in European life in the 20th century. And again, I'm going to pause because what Anna has done is use the stem of the prompt to respond to the prompt. That's excellent because it creates a topic sentence for your paragraph. So one significant continuity in the role of organized religion in European life in the 20th century was that despite the devastating results of World War I and the growing existentialist movement, religion remained a vital resource and a means of guidance for many Europeans through confusing and difficult times. Although most existentialists were atheists, the fundamental beliefs of Christianity were revitalized in this post-war period by thinkers known as Christian existentialists, who argued for overcoming religious doubts. So that was really a nice response. One of the things that, because it's a describe, would probably be okay, but if we're looking to even beef up a response like this, we would want to list a name of a Christian existentialist, a thinker, and that would help that response as well. So really well done, Anna. Here's task B. Again, task B is describe one significant change in the role of organized religion in European life in the 20th century. This is from Shreya at Campbell High School in Georgia. One significant change in the role of organized religion in European life during the 20th century was that before the formation of the USSR, people in most of these European nations could worship freely, but after the USSR was formed, religious beliefs were undermined by socialist beliefs, and therefore religion lost its importance among the countries of the USSR. Religious beliefs lost importance, socialist beliefs gained importance as people like Stalin came to power in the Soviet Union. So the use of the word countries of the USSR, it's completely understanding that she's trying to talk about the different republics within the USSR. But this is a really good response because we do see this is a change. We change from Tsarist government where Orthodox Christianity is part of it, and now that is no longer as big a part of people's lives as Shreya has stated there. So really well done there. And task C. Now this we have an explain tasks. That means that's more difficult. We have to be specific to the how, why, or because. So explain how one political development affected the role of organized religion in European life in the 20th century. This response from Rachel at Brandon High School in Florida. One significant political development that affected the role of organized religion in European life in the 20th century was the period of Nazi persecution of Jews and Catholics during World War II. The hatred of Catholics and the anti-Semitism by the Nazi political party broke the assembly of both groups for years, including direct physical harm to synagogues and the Jewish population in Germany on Kristallnacht in 1938, when Nazi soldiers burned, ravished, and destroyed Semitic communities. So that is definitely a political development, Nazi political party, affecting the role of organized religion. So that's a really, really well done response. Now with task C, as I was looking, and I want to make sure I'm telling you, being really clear, we read all these responses. So please don't think that, oh, he didn't select mine, he didn't care. That's not the case at all. But we did see some errors with task C, because what task A was what's the change in organized religion? What's the continuity in organized religions? Those are the first two. But task C said, what's a political development that affects the role of organized religion? And so many of you didn't talk about a political development in task C, and you just talked about the role of organized religion changing. So we want to make sure that we're reading really carefully the prompt, okay? But this response from Rachel is really well done.
Awesome. And that advice of making sure that you read the prompt, it doesn't matter what kind of question and what exam you're talking about, being really clear and taking a few minutes or just a moment to think about what the task is in any prompt and what they're asking is really, really important. I've had students with the pressure of the exam walk out and realize that they misread the question because of the adrenaline and knowing it was timed. So please, please, please be mindful of that as we're moving forward and for what you're going to encounter on any AP exam in May. All right, so we're going to pick up in the second half of the 20th century and talking about Western Europe and the crisis that they're facing, starting particularly in the 70s. The post-World War II era has this economic boom, and it comes to an end in the early 70s, started in part by Nixon, the president of the United States, taking the US off the gold standard. And we see a chaos and a change where countries are abandoning fixed rates of currency. This is affecting exchange rates. There's all this uncertainty, both in trade and finance. And this confusion and chaos is compounded by an energy crisis and oil crisis. So it's a complicated beginning that has to do with the Middle East and the Six-Day War, but it's furthered by OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, declaring an embargo against the US because after that, the US supports Israel in the fourth Arab-Israeli war. And they raise oil prices, and there's scarcity and the price of oil quadruples, which of course has international effects. We're gonna see unemployment rising. We're gonna see inflation skyrocketing. And yet at the same time, because on Monday, we're gonna talk a little bit more about the EU, that common market that's gonna grow into the EU is expanding. There are several expansions that happen. And in 1973, Great Britain is gonna join that common market. And then we will see Greece, Portugal, and Spain all in the 80s, early and then later 80s, once they have governments that are not dictatorships. Once we have democratic governments in place, we will see those countries join the common market. So that's kind of a little bit about what we're going to talk about on Monday. At the same time, we're going to start to see the Asian tiger, the East Asian countries that are having high-tech manufacturing happening in East Asia. And we will see Asia shift to be the manufacturing center. And Western Europe is not going to be able to create enough jobs for the jobs that they lose to East Asia. So that's going to compound that unemployment. And we're going to see factories close. Heavy industries such as steel and mining are going to be in a decline. That's going to happen in the United States as well. And we're going to see unemployment rise to the highest level since it had been in the Great Depression. And I kind of like that picture that's on the right. Countries in Europe, this is in the Netherlands, they declare fuel-free days where you're not supposed to be using fuel on that day. So we have people riding their horses.
That's a
in
great
1973.
image.
So yeah, I
I've
thought
never seen that image before. What
it's a great picture. So anyway, here we have.
Maybe we should declare that in downtown Miami. That
Yeah,
would be something.
we'll all just jump on our horses and you know, we actually do have horses here. We have a whole kind of rural area that has a lot of riding and
So our guided practice, I selected this document for you. We're going to do sourcing today. And when we're doing sourcing, we have to explain, that is how, why, because, the point of view, the purpose, the historical situation, and or the audience of a source. So that's the acronym HAPPY we have at the bottom. And as Katie has mentioned, sometimes other teachers use HIPPO, or they have their own kind of organization that they work with students on. And please, if your teacher's doing that, just continue to use that. That's what you've been taught. And this source comes from the Polish Communist Party. And these were instructions distributed to school teachers in advance of a visit by Pope John Paul II. Pope John Paul II was the first Polish Pope, and this source is from March of 1979. So you can imagine these are instructions that school teachers were reading to their children. You should convey to your students that the Pope is our enemy because he celebrated the Mass for political dissidents. Due to his uncommon skills and great sense of humor, he is dangerous because he charms everybody, especially journalists. Besides, he goes for cheap gestures in his relations with the crowd. For instance, he puts on a folksy hat, shakes all hands, kisses children, etc. His behavior is modeled on American presidential campaigns. So if we think about this, and if you were to just put pencil to paper right now and jot down a few bullet points, What is the historical situation that is shaping this document? Who is the intended audience of this document? Why is the Polish Communist Party putting together this document for this particular audience? What's its purpose? And what point of view is being expressed in this document? And which of those things you choose, the H, A, P, or P, why is that important? So you would say something to the effect of the historical situation is, give us description, and talk about why that's important in the shaping of this sourcing activity. And we're going to be doing lots more sourcing activities, and I know Katie has one as homework for today as well.
It's also Polish by coincidence. So, all right, so back to sort of the content. In response to those issues I was just talking about in the 70s, we will see a shift in the 80s. And we're going to see leaders in the 80s in many Western European countries, England, England and Germany, not so much France, but we're going to see this shift to neoliberalism. And this is a philosophy that sort of piggybacks on Adam Smith's ideas of laissez-faire. And it contradicts this idea that has been happening where governments have been really supporting through social welfare programs. So we're going to see countries start to adopt this neoliberalism. We will see countries call for privatization of industries. These are industries that have been in the hands of the state, large industries like transportation and communication, with the idea that putting them in the hands of private industry would create more profits, and that profit would stimulate economic growth. So Margaret Thatcher, who's our pictures there on the right, is a perfect example of leaders. She's elected prime minister in 1979, and she's in charge in England throughout that decade, and is going to see a lot of really important things happen during that decade. But she will definitely enact policies that replace that welfare state model. She pushes for free market and private investment, and it doesn't have really good results. It results in a huge rise in unemployment, increases in poverty and crime. And West Germany at the same time does a lot of the same things. Their Chancellor Kohl is going to implement many of the same policies, and there will be unemployment also in West Germany, but they're going to stimulate growth in the economy, and that growth in the economy is going to be really important as we move towards the end of that decade for it to be the economic powerhouse it's going to be to reunite the two sides of Germany. So we'll get to that in a moment.
Let's switch over to the East and talk about what's going on in the Soviet Union. And I have at the title of the slide Gorbachev, but before we talk about Gorbachev, we had yesterday left off talking about Nikita Khrushchev. And Nikita Khrushchev will be replaced especially after the Cuban Missile Crisis, with this person on the right that you see, who is Leonid Brezhnev. And so this very kind of a painting, I guess, of Brezhnev from 1981. So shortly after the invasion of Czechoslovakia, which is an event known as Prague Spring that we're not going to go into detail with, Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev will declare the so-called Brezhnev Doctrine. So we have the Truman Doctrine, right, that Harry Truman issued, which basically said we're going to contain communism. But now we have Brezhnev issuing this doctrine saying that it's the right of the Soviet Union and its allies to intervene militarily in any East Bloc country, wherever they thought it necessary to preserve communist rule. So we talked about yesterday how there was an uprising in Hungary. This Prague Spring, there's an uprising taking place in Czechoslovakia. And what's happening is the Soviet troops are coming in and putting those things down as part of Brezhnev Doctrine. What's also happening, as I go to B, Brezhnev's Soviet Union will ignore human rights provisions of the Helsinki Agreement. So we've got the two superpowers, and we're not really breaking this apart because we're trying to go quickly, but the two superpowers throughout the 70s and early 80s are involved in a number of treaties that they're trying to reduce their nuclear arsenals. And part of those treaties, one is the Helsinki Agreement, and as part of that agreement, there was a statement about how you have to honor human rights. Brezhnev's Soviet Union will ignore the human rights provision of the Helsinki Agreement, and East-West political competition remains very much alive outside of Europe. And then in C, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in December of 1979 causes many Americans to fear that the oil-rich states of the Persian Gulf may be next. And they once again look to NATO alliance and military might to thwart communist expansion. Brezhnev will pass away. He dies in 1982. His successor is the longtime chief of the secret police, Yuri Andropov. And he tried to invigorate the system, but relatively little came of these efforts. And so, we're going to next slide, please, Katie. After Andropov, we have, there is one more leader, Konstantin Chernenko, a Soviet leader before Gorbachev. And Chernenko only served a few months before he died. So we have these really aging generation of Soviet leaders passing away. And then all of a sudden in 1985, we have Mikhail Gorbachev. He is a very vigorous Soviet leader in a generation and an idealist who wants to improve conditions for ordinary citizens. He is different, Mikhail Gorbachev, than the previous leaders. He's of a different generation, and he is university educated, and he wants to see that different things happen for his country. He realizes the different problems they're having, especially economically, and he's trying to meet those needs. So in paragraph B, in order to meet the real needs of the Soviet population, some of Gorbachev's first reform policies have this ambitious program of economic restructurings. Okay, so keep in mind the Soviet Union has always had very much state-controlled economy. And he wants to restructure that, which he calls perestroika, and allow an easing of government price controls on goods, more independence for state enterprises, the creation of profit-seeking private cooperatives. So this is similar to, if you can think back to Lenin's new economic policy, Lenin's NEP, which he used to kind of generate the economy after the trials of the First World War and the Russian Revolution. And then Stalin put that down. And they've had these state controls for so long and these 5-year plans. But now here's Gorbachev instigating perestroika, trying to get more private enterprises going on. In paragraph C, after a few initial improvements, however, the economy stalls. And by the late 1988, widespread consumer dissatisfaction posed another serious threat to Gorbachev's leadership and reform. Gorbachev has another policy, and it's bold, and this is called openness or glasnost, which is much more successful, meaning because the state has controlled and censored so much information to try and keep everyone in line, now we're going to allow some openness where there's less censorship and more of public discourse, more discussion. For the first time on television, some of the Soviet parliament is being televised, so people for the first time could see their leaders just debating in parliament and having these discussions, and that is part of Gorbachev's glasnost. With Gorbachev, we also see more, I don't know, historians are calling it more democratization. I struggle a little bit with that word because it's not like people are going and there's free elections and everything else, but they're using it because there's a shift that's taking place with glasnost, with perestroika. And now because of this, those non-Russian minorities in those satellite states want greater autonomy. And they're leading to the emergence of national independence movements in 15 of the Soviet republics. Gorbachev will also bring about reforms to the field of foreign affairs. He's going to withdraw from the very failed war with Afghanistan in February of 1989, and that helps to reduce the East-West tensions. Gorbachev will also encourage reform movements in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and pledges to respect the political choices of the people of the East Bloc. And he repudiates or takes back the Brezhnev Doctrine. And so the source that you see there are some of the Soviet troops leaving Afghanistan in February of 1988. And so when Gorbachev comes to power, there is great change. You know, how is the Soviet Union handling the change is what historians are really still even talking about today.
All right, so with everything that we're talking about here with Gorbachev and this sort of openness, we're going to see that having implications in the satellite countries that are controlled by the Soviet Union as there's national movements to break free from that. We're going to see the fall of the Eastern Bloc. In Poland, we will see, and you can see the picture that's on the top right, the outlawed trade union Solidarity will gain power. We're going to see that after incredible worker strikes, the communist government kind of gets solidarity to the table, wanting them to help get workers back to work. And they offer to negotiate with them, and they will legalize solidarity as a party and promise to allow free elections. They underestimate what Solidarity's ability to mobilize people to get to the polls, and Solidarity will win all but one seat in that election, and they will swear in a non-communist prime minister. So that's like a huge moment in these Eastern Bloc states. In Czechoslovakia, which you can see the picture on the lower right, we have the Velvet Revolution, and so named because it's not violent. It happens very peacefully. We will see communist rule ending. Popular demonstrations are led by students and intellectuals, which is very common. And the communist government will just resign, and they will elect former playwright and intellectual Havel as president. It's a very iconic moment there in the Velvet Revolution. I didn't mention Hungary here, but that's important as well, that Hungary, in an effort to kind of support its failing government, will open its border with East Germany. And that's going to have people flooding out of East Germany into Hungary and then trying to end up back through Austria into West Germany. And then in Romania, unlike Czechoslovakia, we have a very violent end to the communist regime here. We have protesters in December of 1989 that will be put down violently by the security forces, killing hundreds of people, about 800. And the communist government will end when the very nasty dictator Ceausescu is captured and executed along with his wife, and they will put into place a democratic coalition government. And then again, we're sweeping through this very quickly. There are so many amazing, iconic images of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And students, I encourage you to take a look at some of the video and film out there of that particular momentous night and the next couple of days. It's really, I was a junior in high school during this time, and I remember watching it as it unfolded. And I guess just like now, we're all living history. But in November of 1989, the German government will open the Berlin Wall, the passage from East Berlin into West Berlin, which is not only the barrier, but also the symbol of communism in East Germany. Over 9 million East Germans will enter West Germany in that next week. And so it seems clear that we've had a reformist government that will take power in East Germany, and they're going to schedule free elections. And West Germany really has the economic security to negotiate with the Soviet Union and Gorbachev to break free and reunite these two halves of East and West Germany. So Gorbachev and the Chancellor of West Germany will sign an agreement in July. And by October of 1990, they have merged back into a unified single nation under the constitution and laws of West Germany. And so again, we're sweeping through this really quickly, but those images, the images of East Germans walking into West Germany for the first time are really powerful, and they're worth taking a look at if you have some time.
So thank you, Katie. So we went through the 70s and the 80s really fast, as Katie mentioned, and now we are in the 90s. And one of the things that we have to talk about is the ethnic cleansing that takes place in the Balkans with the Yugoslavian civil war. So Yugoslavia is this conglomeration of many different ethnicities. And if you think about this, if we talk about, how we started the century started with a war basically breaking out because of something that happened in Sarajevo, right? With the assassination of the Archduke. And now we're going to end the century with events again in Sarajevo and Yugoslavia. So there's tragedy in Yugoslavia after the death of the leader Josip Tito in 1980. And that power then devolved to the constituent republics of Yugoslavia. Tito had kept all this together. He was a dictator. He kept it together. So we didn't see this kind of it wasn't at least open to the West to see any type of strife or discord that was going on in Yugoslavia at the time. But what's going to add to it, besides Tito's death, is economic decline. And they start to revive memory of World War II massacres that were inspired by ethnic hatred, and it causes more ethnic division. In 1991, then, Croatia and Slovenia will declare their independence and defend it from Serbia, led by the president who's a man whose name was Slobodan Milosevic. So in 1992, civil war is going to spread to Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the Serbs, which were 30% of the population, refused to live under Bosnian Muslim rule. And then in E, the ensuing civil war will involve rape, murder of civilians, widespread use of concentration camps. So it's similar to what we had seen in World War II, these concentration camps and these different atrocities. And the map that I've given you here on the right from Wikimedia Commons, an ethnic map of the former Yugoslavia circa 1991. And you can see these many different ethnic groups spread throughout Yugoslavia who had been living side by side and rather peacefully, but these kind of populist, resurgent nationalist movements kind of rear their ugly head again, and then we start to see this civil war break out. Next slide, please. I want to start with this image, and then we'll get to the paragraphs. So in 1984, Sarajevo hosted the Olympic Winter Games, and they were successful and things were great. But during this ethnic cleansing and this Yugoslav civil war, all these deaths start to stack up. And so the image you're seeing here is from 1993. So not 10 years since the Olympic Games. What you see are graves begin to fill a huge field in a Sarajevo cemetery as numbers of people killed in the Yugoslavian civil war increase. The cemetery overflows into the Olympic Stadium in the background at right. So if you can look just beyond the graves up to the background at right, this kind of rather plain looking stadium, but that's where the Winter Games opening ceremonies were held. And now that's turning into a graveyard less than 10 years from that time. So we go to A. In 1995, NATO is going to intervene, and their air forces against the Bosnian Serbs led to a negotiated settlement dividing Bosnia between Serbs and Bosnians. And B, the ethnic conflict will break out in Kosovo as Albanians who want their independence and Serbs begin a campaign of intimidation and ethnic cleansing. And I have struggled a little bit with the language. We sometimes make the language really soft, ethnic cleansing, when it's a form of genocide. We're trying to wipe out a people. And in C, in March of 1999, NATO begins bombing Yugoslavia, forcing the Serbs to withdraw from Kosovo after expelling 750,000 Albanians. And in July of 2001, the Serbs vote Milosevic out of office, and the new Serb government turned him over to the War Crimes Tribunal in the Netherlands. He was supposed to stand trial in The Hague. He'd been in prison, and he dies in prison in the early 2000s without standing trial.
Okay, so hopefully, besides the key takeaways of the lesson, you also were really happy to see the rubric for the exam and all of the possible ways that students are able to gain points on this task that is going to combine history and historical knowledge and argument and skills and interpretation. So I think it's a really nice way to showcase everything that these students have been working so hard on all year. Besides that, we've talked about the causes and effects of mass atrocities from the period following World War II. We've explained state-based economic developments, and we'll continue to do that, both of those things on Monday, and talked more about the causes and effects of the Cold War. We've had the historical thinking skills of development and processes, sourcing and situation, making connections, and reasoning development for causation. And so, very much like what Todd did earlier in the lesson, I also have a Polish document that's from an old DBQ from 2014, I think. And it's during this time period in the second half of the 20th century. The prompt had something to do with the causes of workers' movements during this time. And so we have an open letter signed by several prominent Polish intellectuals and read on Polish language radio stations that are broadcast from Western Europe in June of 1976. Let's just read it together. We declare our solidarity with the workers of Poland who have gone on strike. In the system of government presently prevailing in our country, the only form in which people can express their real attitudes is through outbursts of social discontent, outbursts which are dangerous in their consequences. Without the establishment of a system of real representation of workers, it is not possible to study effectively the needs and aspirations of our society. In their present form, the official trade unions do not fulfill this role. Recent events have again confirmed how completely fictitious the official unions are. So I want you for your homework we're gonna really be thinking about the things you're gonna have to do for that document-based question in May. And sourcing is gonna be, 2 out of these 10 possible points. So we're gonna practice that. And I'd like you to try to give us a sourcing statement about the things that we've told you this document has. So there's so much rich information in that source that could be dictating the content of this document, the kind of document it is, who wrote and signed the document, where the document was broadcast, all of that. So for your homework, we'd like you to come up with a sourcing statement, and we will feature on Monday some nice examples of that, as you have been doing, and as we continue to be impressed by. You can email them to apeuro@gmail.com and include your first name, your school, and your state or your country. And we've been surprised at how many international people are tuning in.
This is a statement from College Board as we get closer to that exam. We know that not all students have access to the internet or a device. We're working on solutions to help students get what they need to show their best work. If you need mobile tools or connectivity or know someone who does, reach out directly to College Board at cb.org/tech. Okay, so just a quick shout out. Thank you to our producer, Sarah. She's been amazing.
Oh, always, she's awesome.
Like I said, I'm in Minneapolis, Katie's in Miami, Sarah's in New Jersey, and we're making this happen. It just, we couldn't do it without her, and so we really appreciate her. I also want to say a quick shout out. We had a number of students from Aberdeen Central High School in South Dakota submit their responses, and I just wanted you to know I saw you, I see you. Thank you for doing that work. Keep working at it, and we invite everybody to keep turning in those responses. We do read through them all, and they do inform us. So as we now know what the exam is going to be, really it's kind of good that you would please try to put in those responses, because it does inform the work that Katie and I are going to be delivering to you.
Yep, have a wonderful weekend. Again, all this work, we're going to be practicing the skills that you need for May 13th. So we're looking ahead, but have a great weekend and take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.